Hello and welcome back. It is Tuesday, September 4th, 2018, and this is the A-Side Live Chat podcast, aka the S&M podcast for all our freaks out there. My name is Shaun Al-Shatti, and as always, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Joining me today, as always, is my partner in crime, my co-host, my good friend. He is back from a mini vacation in Chicago, Mr. Marc Raimondi. How is everything going today, Marc?
Can I make a request? Can you, from now on, introduce me the way that Dana White introduced Conor McGregor during the Maymac World Tour? Is that possible? Can we make that happen?
Just go pure bright red, all red.
Just complete insanity, screaming at the top of your lungs, capillaries bursting in your face. That's what I want every week. Wednesdays usually, but now today on Tuesday. Hello, everyone.
Yeah, a little early edition. I'll make you a deal, Marc. When we get closer to UFC 229, I will give you the Dana White intro.
I think you should start rehearsing it right now. What do you think?
I got to lead up to it, man. We can't give away the goods this early.
The slow build? Slow build?
It's all about the slow build, man.
Fair.
Well, hey, thank you guys so much for joining us again. Like we said, this is a special early edition of the A-Side Live Chat podcast. Tuesday, I'll be knee deep in UFC 228 fight week stuff in Dallas tomorrow. I actually have a flight to catch in like a few hours, which is why we're doing this. But we still wanted to take some time this week to, spend it with y'all. And hey, there's lots to discuss today. UFC 228, of course, Tyron Woodley versus Darren Till. That's the big one. But it's also kind of a sneaky good card, Marc. I mean, when you look at it up and down, there's a lot to like there. Also, I mean, we can look back at the busy week that was, or we can look ahead to the craziness in front of us with the MMA schedule really getting it ready to heat up. But like we always say, I mean, this is your show, guys. So we'll talk about whatever you want us to talk about. You can ask us a question on the MMA Fighting page below. Any question that gets 3 recommendations, those will turn green. Those will get priority. Or you can ask us questions on Twitter using the hashtags #TheA-Side or Chat Rappers. A replay of this podcast will be up immediately following the show on YouTube and an audio-only version, podcast version, up on SoundCloud. As we said last week, iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, those are in the works. Those are coming. We have been told they should be good to go sometime this month. So we will keep you guys posted on that. But in the meantime, hey, let's get going. Let's dive into some of those questions. And first up to this week comes from our good friend Dizzy Dorf, loyal listener, who asks about Nico Montano versus Valentina Shevchenko. Shevchenko, he writes, is a massive minus 1,400 favorite, Jesus Christ, against Nico Montano. Would this be the biggest upset in UFC history if Nico pulled off the win? What do you think, Marc?
I guess odds-wise, it would have to be up there, if not number one, right? I don't know I'm not a big gambler. I'm not a big betting odds guy. I have to ask John Anik about that. But I think it's in terms of stakes, I don't feel like it would be. I still feel like Sarah beating GSP is the biggest upset in MMA history, at least in UFC history. This might be actually longer odds for Montano, and it would be a shock, absolutely. But I think because it's still a fairly low-profile division and low-profile title, I couldn't grant it the top spot for biggest upset because let's be honest. I mean, some of these things, Montano herself is still kind of like an unknown quantity. We don't really know where she is yet. We haven't seen all that much of her outside of the Ultimate Fighter and the win against Roxanne Modafferi. With that being said, yeah, of course, I would be stunned if she won. And you know what? I think the odds are still a bit long, considering. Again, we don't know much about Montano. We do know Shevchenko is fantastic, but Montano is a tough cookie. I really think that Montano is going to be tougher than people think. And people have brought up, is this going to be like the Shevchenko Cachoeira fight? I don't think so. I think it's going to go much longer. I think it even could be a decision. I think Montano is just really, really tough and durable. And that would be one of her big strengths. Of course, when you say someone is tough and durable, that sometimes means that you're kind of anticipating they may get beat up, but I think it'll be a better fight than some people think.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the Cachoeira fight because I've been hearing a lot of that too. And Cachoeira was still very, very green. I think that's not really representative of where Nico is. Although you made a very good point in that she is a very unknown quantity still. I think that's telling in a way because even though she had that run on the Ultimate Fighter and she did have that fight against Roxanne Modafferi for the title, I think the jury's still out on her, right? Like we actually don't know. It's been so long since we've seen her fight. It's been basically the whole year. But that being said, I mean, just odds wise, going into this, I think right now Nico is maybe like a 7-1 or 8-1 dog as the defending champion. If that holds true, and actually it seems to be rising. When I checked the odds last week compared to this week, they're up. I think she's almost a 9-1 dog now on some places. If that holds true, man, like she would easily be the biggest betting underdog for a defending UFC champion in the history of the promotion. I repeat that, man, because the biggest betting underdog in the 25-year history of the UFC as a defending champion. That's incredible, man. Like, that's just disrespect. If I was Nico, like, I would take that as incredible disrespect and motivation, wouldn't you?
Sure, but I think that she probably won't pay it any mind. It seems like she is very good about tuning everything out. Social media, media,
everything.
I'm sure the betting odds will probably be lumped into that as well. I don't think that she's worrying about that. I feel like she lives kind of like a very like simple life, and she stays off the grid, which in cases like this might be a benefit. If she is not, she doesn't strike me as someone who's buying into the Valentina Shevchenko hype, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. To me, this almost feels like the perfect confluence of events, right? Because like I was looking it up, and even the Matt Serra, because you mentioned Matt Serra, GSP, I think I agree with you. That's still one of my biggest upsets ever, if not the biggest. Matt Serra in the rematch when he was the champion and he was defending similar circumstance, he never even got the highest he got was like a little over 4-1. I think it was like plus 400 something. So it's still not even like even approaching the same range. So in my mind, it's almost like the perfect confluence of events where for a long time, when Valentina Shevchenko was spoken of, she was almost this uncrowned queen of 125. Like when she first came into the UFC, it was very obvious two things. One, that she was very good. If you remember, she debuted against Sarah Kaufman and beat Sarah Kaufman. I mean, that's a hell of a debut.
On short notice, too.
On short notice, yeah. But also, it was very obvious that she was not fit for this weight class, really. Like, she was fighting up. She barely cut any weight. And I think very quickly people kind of, again, crowned her this uncrowned queen of 125, that whenever 125 came, she would be that person to seize the throne and really like be that long reigning champion, maybe in the way that Joanna Jędrzejczyk did for 115. And now that it's here and the person she's facing, again, she basically has a whole year worth of, because Nico was out for so long, and it was very hard to hear from her, to get her side of things for a long time. It kind of built where people would in the public space, just being like, Nico's going to get crushed. Nico doesn't deserve to be here. Nico's not the real champion. She's keeping the belt warm for Valentina. And I feel like it's all just culminated in this, where it really is this incredible line. I frankly can't get over how outrageously one-sided this line is. And I agree with you. I think Nico's going to end up, maybe, so if not, I don't think she's going to win, but I think she'll be much tougher than I think people expect. It feels like people are expecting a walkover, like the Cachoeira fight. And Nico, for whatever she is, like you said, she is very tough, durable, a grinder. I don't see it being similar to that fight.
Speaking of odds, let me ask you this, kind of going off course a little bit here. The main event, Till versus Woodley. I'm not asking you about the odds about who's going to win. I'm asking you the odds about will Till make weight? What would you set the line at if we were betting on that? And by the way, why are sportsbooks doing this? This could be a potentially lucrative business.
Hold on, are we betting on this?
Oh no. I'm just saying, I'm asking you to set a line. That's all I'm doing. I'm not giving a bet. I'm not making a prediction on if he's gonna make weight, because I don't even want to put any bad juju on it. I really hope he makes weight, but I'm asking you what the betting line would be.
All right, that's fair. I love how quickly you backtracked off that.
I just don't want to see the guy miss weight. I want to see Woodley versus Till this weekend. I don't want to mess around. You heard what Woodley said last week. He's not fighting anyone but Till. If Till misses weight, he's going to fight Till. He's not fighting Usman. If Till doesn't make the scale, if he can't make the fight, he's not fighting anyone. So I don't even want to, like you said last week about Maymack, I don't want to put that thought into the universe, but I'm asking you anyway.
Yeah.
What's the line on Till making weight?
God, can you imagine what the chaos that Friday and Saturday would look like if they miss weight, if Darren Till misses weight and it's just a non-title fight that doesn't mean anything in the main event? That would be so disastrous. I think he's going to make it. I'm going to put that good juju in the world. But in general, I feel like I have good sense that he's going to make it. He's been at the Las Vegas UFC Performance Institute for several weeks now. Those guys are world-class facilities. Like, they have this down to a science. I feel like they have him. He's not enjoying life by any means. We saw that last week at his workout, but I feel like this is such a big opportunity. And he is also so damn sick of hearing people talk about his weight. I would put, if I was to make the line, I would say minus 120 that he makes it, plus 105 that he misses.
So you're still kind of leaving the door open for some doubt there.
Well, you got that's just how the lines work. But I would say the favorite would be that he makes it. What do you think?
I mean, yeah, I think he's gonna make it, and I think we're gonna have a title fight. I hope so, but because he has not actually, I mean, hitting 171 has been difficult for him. Hitting 170 has been even harder. But again, like you said, he has been at the PI. I hope that he has taken heed of what they're trying to do over there, and he's gotten his weight down now. I mean, today is Tuesday. Today is check-in day. I'd be very curious to see what he will check in at today, how much weight. Let's use that as a segue now, Shaun, to our next question from Ben L on MMAfighting.com. Till already talking about middleweight. Hi, Marc and Shaun. Till made comments to the effect that should he win the welterweight belt this weekend, he plans on defending it once and then moving up to middleweight. If he loses, do you think he will move up for his next fight? If so, who would you match him up with for his first fight at middleweight?
Okay, so there's a lot of projection here, right? Like, if he were to lose, that's an interesting question, because I think if he were to lose, middleweight would feel like the obvious next step, right? Because he's already kind of laid out his perfect scenario, and that would be a win on Saturday, defend the title once, then move on to middleweight. But the fact that he's already talking about middleweight so openly and so commonly, it really feels inevitable for him. So if he's in there and he loses the title, especially in this type of situation where maybe the title shot wasn't warranted, it was more issue of the schedule, his path back would be so steep. He would have to do so much. That would involve several fights again at 170. I feel like at that point, he's 25. You can only wreck your body for so long until it kind of compounds and becomes this untenable process. So I feel like in that case, coming off a title loss, he's 100% moving to middleweight. And in that situation, I would give him somebody in that 15 to 10 range, depending on availability. I think that would be like a nice introduction. Maybe like I don't know, maybe like a Uriah Hall, something like that, where he's like 10 to 15 range. It's a tough test, but it's not like particularly a massive middleweight, but someone who still could like gauge his viability at 185.
Actually, game that I was thinking of because it would be a very interesting striking battle. But I think if he loses this fight against Woodley, I think he's going to move up to middleweight. I mean, he probably should have already moved up, but when you have a title challenge staring you in the face, what are you going to say? No, you know what? I can't make 170 title fight. I mean, he could beat Woodley. If he makes the weight, he can certainly beat Woodley. So I think that if he loses, he will move up, certainly. And I like that idea. I like that idea of a Uriah Hall, maybe even, like an Eric Anders, someone like that, a Cesar Mutanch, someone in that kind of middle range there for Till. And I think he said also that he doesn't want to just move up and get, a title eliminator or a title fight. He does want to pay his dues in the weight class, which is interesting. Not everyone says that. So I think someone somewhere in that range, but it is inevitable. He's moving to middleweight. It really just depends on what happens this weekend. But I think I think no matter what happens, Till will be fighting at 185 in 2019.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I want to jump on a point that you mentioned where, when you get these title opportunities, you have to just take them regardless of whether you want to be at that weight class or not. I mean, that's something we saw most recently with Michael Chiesa. It may be not the title opportunity, but more so right before he missed weight for his last fight at UFC 226, he was talking openly about how this cut was untenable for him and he didn't want to be in this weight class anymore. But at that point, especially in lightweight, like it's different when we talk about middleweight to light heavyweight and those type of things, that kind of jump. But lightweight and welterweight are so damn deep in this sport. Chiesa's point was that, he's invested so much time and work to be able to get to a place to be in that sort of top tier of the lightweight division, that to have to restart all over again at welterweight is just a not appetizing scenario, right? Like that's a very difficult proposition for somebody to make. And so again, with Darren Till, I at this point, he has this title opportunity. He has to just take it. He has no choice, right? Like he has to take this title opportunity and see it through as long as it can, whether that's he wins and then he can defend his title again, like he said, or it ends on Saturday. But I think I agree with you. In 2019, it feels inevitable that he will be fighting at middleweight. And to keep carry on, next question. Let's continue talking about UFC 228. This one comes.
Fighters don't have as many choices as people think they do. They really don't. They really don't. Choices is a very subjective, broad word. Everyone has a choice, but when one choice gets you a title shot and one choice gets you, a fight like Yesa had against Anthony Pettis that could put you in line for a title fight, when there is the possibility of more money when you go in one direction, that's not really a choice at all. Kind of like Robert Whittaker when he fought Yoel Romero at UFC 225. Sure, he could have said, you know what, sorry, Romero didn't make weight. It's not a title fight. I'm not going to do this. He could have said that very easily, and people would have killed him for it. But I think if fighters start saying, no, I'm not fighting this guy who missed weight, I think we'll get more. I think we'll get less people missing weight, fewer people missing weight because they put their foot down. Whereas now it's like, all right, you miss weight, there's going to be pressure on you to fight. But because Whittaker flew from Australia to Chicago, he wasn't going to make any money if he didn't fight. What are really his options? So people say the fighters have choices, but do they really have choices? Like I said, there are choices that kind of make it very tough for a fighter to decide on one thing over another.
Well, not even would he have not made any money. He would have lost money. Like he would have actively lost probably a lot of money, a grip of money, like at least probably 4 to 5 figures, depending on how much he invested in his training camp. That none of that's recouped if he didn't choose to fight there. So that's a very good point.
And that's going to be really interesting to see this weekend too with Woodley. He's saying he's putting his foot down and he's saying he's not fighting Usman. He's like, I'm not fighting Usman no matter what, even if Till can't make the fight. Will that actually happen? Will he not actually fight Usman? If that opportunity presents itself, will Woodley put his foot down and say, you know what? I'm not even going to get paid. I'm going to lose money on this training camp. Usman will be right there. He'll have weighed in. He'll be available to fight. But Woodley is saying no. Will he actually follow through? I think he will. I think he's a man of his word. But that'll be tempting when you have that possibility of not making a dime and losing money on your training camp, on nutrition, et cetera, staring you in the face. It's hard to say no to that.
I think he's a man of his word, although I think there is a chance there because he is also a savvy businessman. And if the UFC sweetens the pot enough to where it is therefore worth it for him to make that risk, I feel like that's an actual chance that could happen. Depending on if the UFC is willing to open their pockets in that situation, in a situation that they created, really, like we've said in past weeks. But hey, let's keep talking about UFC 228. Next question comes from Matt the Donk, another loyal listener. We really appreciate it, man. UFC 228, non-title fights to get excited about. Aside from the 2 title fights at the top of the card, what are the fights on this card fans should be getting excited for? So what is your immediate response when I say non-title fights that you should get excited for this week, Marc?
I think there are some really good women's fights on the card. I think that Jessica Andrade versus Karolina Kowalkiewicz is a really big one that could set up a title challenge for Rose Namajunas maybe later this year or early next year. It seems like that is somewhat of a title eliminator, you would imagine. However, speaking of that division, there's another incredible fight in the strawweight division on the UFC 228 card as well. And I'm talking about Tatiana Suarez versus Carla Esparza. I think that if Suarez is able to beat Esparza impressively, she could jump the line, I think. I really do. I really believe she can jump the line and become that #1 contender if she's able to finish Esparza, who is super, super tough. I think that those 2 fights could be a very illuminating look into the future of the strawweight division. So off the bat, I would say those fights. And then, you have Zabit Magomedsharipov, who is always a must watch. Like you can't actually, you have to watch that guy. Like if you haven't seen him, you must watch him. He is an incredible force of nature and a future star in the division. And I think overall, I think it's one of my favorite cards of the year, top to bottom. I'm not going to lie. I really like this card a lot.
One of your favorites of the year. That's interesting. I like the card a lot. I wouldn't go that far, but that's interesting to hear you say that. I'm going to echo.
Well, let me preface that by saying, as long as Till makes the scale and makes weight, it'll be one of my favorite cards of the year.
Oh my God. I feel like we're going to be prefacing this whole week. It's ridiculous, but I want to echo two things you said, the women's fights in particular. The Karolina Kowalkiewicz versus Jessica Andrade fight, that to me is the most important fight on the card that is not a non-title, or that is not a title fight. Because you said maybe Tatiana Suarez can jump the queue. I don't feel like that's happening. I feel like regardless, that Karolina versus Jessica Andrade fight is a true number one contender fight in every sense of the word. An good old-fashioned number one contender fight, like where we rarely see these type of days, where regardless of who wins, the winner of that feels like they are the next title challenger. Because if you look at both those women have very interesting storylines and narratives driving them in their title chase. I mean, Karolina Kowalkiewicz is the last person to beat Rose Namajunas. She beat her recently. There's a story there. There is, and she is on a nice run. And Jessica Andrade, I mean, I feel like she is already the number one contender. If there was a title fight tomorrow, as opposed to, because Rose has been hurt, so she hasn't been able to defend the title. But if Jessica was that person, she would have been thrown into there. I feel like she's just this is a placeholder for her. And in particular, I mean, after you read our good friend Guilherme Cruz's story from last week about how she's selling off her UFC gear, baking cakes to make money, like she just needs to take a fight to keep an income coming. So that in my mind is a true number one contender fight through and through. I'm really looking forward to that. And like you said, Tatiana Suarez versus Carla Esparza, I think that will tell us a lot about the future of this division, because I agree with you. I think Tatiana Suarez is a future title challenger, if not a future champion in this division. If you haven't already, go read Chuck Mindenhall's fantastic feature on her from last week. She has a really incredible story, and her credentials, man. She is still so young in this game, and she's an incredibly tough matchup for a lot of women in that division. There is not a lot of power wrestling in that division outside of maybe Carla Esparza or Claudia Gadelha, and Tatiana Suarez could really become a force. And then I guess if I want to add one you didn't mention, one that stands out to me is actually like a sneaky good opener for the pay-per-view. Nico Price versus Abdul Razak Al Hassan, two welterweights who maybe aren't getting the shine that they deserve because that division is so damn deep. It's ridiculous how deep that division is, that these guys are both, I think, like 5-1, 4-1, 3-1 in the UFC, with just tons of knockouts, all knockouts galore. Like, that's an explosive matchup for however long it lasts. And I feel like those two are, again, two very nice prospects who are really, if they are not in the top 15 after this fight, they'll at least be on the precipice of being right outside of that rankings in that division. It's so hard to make it to the rankings of that division, but I feel like they will be right there.
That will be a festival of violence. That fight is certainly circled on my bout sheet. Also, Jimmy Rivera versus John Dodson.
Yes,
what a bantamweight fight that is. Like I said, I like this card a whole lot. I really do.
Not only that, I mean, you got the return of Aljamain Sterling, you got the return of Diego Sanchez, Jim Miller's in there. Like, there's a lot of names, man. There's a lot of interesting stuff on that card. And so I want to continue with the theme of UFC 228. Coming up with our next question. Darren Till, surprised by the negative fan reaction. Marc, what kind of reception do you think Darren will get this week in Dallas? A lot of the online chatter, this comes from Matt the Dunk. A lot of the online chatter I've seen is pretty negative. Comments about how Till can't make weight, didn't really beat Wonder Boy. And Till's own statement about not caring about his daughter and pregnant girlfriend. Do you think there is any chance a negative crowd reaction could throw Till off of his game this week? His last fight was in front of an adoring hometown crowd where he could do no wrong. And he writes, I have to believe it's going to be pretty different this time around. What do you think? What do you expect to see in terms of crowd reaction to Darren this week?
I don't know what to expect necessarily, but I do think that even if it is negative, I don't see Darren Till really caring all that much. If we remember the Liverpool card, he did get a hero's welcome, and it really wasn't all that great of a fight anyway. It was actually one of his more lackluster performances. So the hot crowd for him didn't really help him necessarily. I don't think a crowd booing him would help or hurt him. And honestly, I think he'll actually be the fan favorite in this fight. I think that the crowd will probably boo Woodley, or maybe not give Woodley a great reception, as has been the case in previous fights. I still think there's that lingering resent of Woodley for a few reasons, including some of his performances lately against Wonder Boy and Damian Maia. I think Till will actually be the crowd favorite. I think he'll get cheered. And even if he didn't, I don't see it affecting Darren Till. I think that the biggest obstacle for that man this week is the scale. And if he can conquer the scale, if he can hit 170, I think that he'll be fine. And I don't think anything will really upset him. That doesn't mean I think he's going to win. I think it's going to be a good fight. And I think Woodley could win. I'm not really sure what will happen yet. I will leave my prediction for Friday after weigh-ins because, again, we don't even know if there will be a fight. You just never freaking know. But yeah, Till's not getting affected by any of that stuff. I can't imagine that affecting him.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think one thing to remember is like I've seen a lot of this reaction too, right? The negativity with Darren Till. Anytime we write about him recently, it's always make weight. But I think one thing you have to kind of remember is like we're so deep in the bubble, like we live within this own bubble. Where for a lot of us, the real like crazies, the hardcores out here, we're so deep in the forest that it is sometimes really impossible to see the trees. And I feel like that negativity that's been pretty omnipresent on the internet over the past couple of weeks, it's not really representative of the whole fan base at large. Like Darren Till is still like a lightly known guy. Like he's not a really well-known guy when it comes to the general public, but he's got an engaging personality. And like, I feel like people mostly just know him because he scored this huge knockout over Donald Cerrone, who was a fan favorite. I think that like, and he has like an accent, and that's silly to say, but like for an American audience, like he's an engaging guy who knocked out Donald Cerrone and has a cool accent. And I think that's all casual fans really know about him. So I don't feel like there's like people are showing up to Dallas to go hang out and watch their idols, or not even their idols, but like athletes that they really respect. They're not coming there to just boo Darren Till. So I'm sure he's going to be given the benefit of the doubt by fans this week in Dallas. And I agree with you. I think we've seen it with Tyron. Like for some reason, people just don't like Tyron. So I feel like he'll probably be the fan favorite for the most part. At least I will add a caveat though, at least until he shows that maybe he shouldn't be given that benefit of the doubt. And by that, I mean, if he goes in there and he misses weight on Friday and just this whole thing goes awry, I feel like at that point, especially the way that he got this title fight, I think it's safe to say that you can expect Dallas to let him hear about it on Saturday at that point.
I still think Darren Till is a future star in the UFC if he plays his cards right. I really do. I think he does have that personality. And you know what? Being hated doesn't mean you're not a star. The biggest stars in UFC history were hated more than loved in some cases, and they still did all right. And I think Till will. I think he could be a pretty decent draw down the line, depending on how this all plays out for him.
Yeah. Well, hey, I think keep it on the theme of 228. Last question about this week. This comes from Searden. I hope I'm saying that right. Searden on the MMA Fighting webpage, who asks about the overall grand picture. UFC 228 pay-per-view buys. This week, or this being a week before Triple G versus Canelo 2 and being the pay-per-view before Khabib versus Conor, how well do you think UFC 228 does in pay-per-view buys? The card has some interesting fights, but ultimately is unappealing to casual fans, with Woodley not being a fan-friendly name until being a UK draw, meaning no pay-per-view points there. The UFC must know how little this upcoming card generates in pay-per-views, right? So that's what he asks. So, Mark, I mean, what are you getting the sense for in terms of the buy rate that we could be expecting this week, the buzz?
It's a good question. I don't think it'll be a huge draw. I don't think it'll be one of the bigger numbers of the year. But I also didn't think that way about UFC 227, which was headlined, of course, by Dillashaw Garbrandt. I thought that was not going to do very well. I thought it would do maybe somewhere in the 100s or 200,000 range. And it ended up doing, according to Dave Meltzer, about 300,000, which is, you know what, in today's day and age, pretty solid number. I think that I could see, and I do see a trend upward in interest for UFC big pay-per-views a little bit. I know that the ratings have not looked very good on FS1, but I have seen a little bit of a positive trend in the interest of UFC pay-per-views, and I think this one has some interest at least. Again, it all really depends on, we keep beating this dead horse, but it all depends on Till, making weight. And sometimes maybe if there's even a little bit of drama on Friday with him making weight eventually, that could also lead to some extra pay-per-view buys if it gets some mainstream attention. But I would say somewhere in the range of 227, maybe not quite as much, but it's hard to say. It's hard to say where we are right now as far as interest in UFC pay-per-view. I do think that the timing is a little bit rough because as our friend said in the comment, Triple G Canelo is coming up next week, and UFC 229 is really just what is it 4 weeks away now? Is it
4 weeks?
4 weeks away, which is crazy. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But that timing could hurt it. But I think it'll do better than people think it will do, if that makes any sense.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I mean, if you're right, the timing is a tough proposition. I feel like the UFC even knew that. It feels like they kind of punted on the promotion for this. There hasn't been a lot of promotion, if any. I don't know that I've seen a lot at all. But it's interesting because if you look at the last few pay-per-views that were headlined by Tyron, I know we don't think of them as a draw, but they had similar levels of kind of support on the undercard. And they did like the numbers you were saying. Like at first UFC 201, which obviously was 2 years ago. So it's a different time and place. But that was the Lawler fight. I mean, that was like right at the height of like Robbie Lawler's run, right after the Condit and McDonald and Hendricks wars, and like everyone was so into him. That drew, if I'm remembering rightly, that drew around like 240,000. And then Tyron's next headliner was UFC 209, and we talk about disasters of a card. That was the Wonder Boy rematch, and that was supposed to be Khabib versus Ferguson. And if you remember, that was the one Khabib went to the hospital literally the day of the weigh-ins, and that was just the whole card blew up. The main event ended up being David Tamor versus Lando Venata, which was a great fight, but like it's not a co-main event of a pay-per-view. And so that with an objectively weaker undercard than like what we are looking at now in a disaster fight week, that still drew around that 300,000 baseline. So I think that may be the baseline for Tyron in general if it's an interesting matchup. But of course, that was before I have to mention, I mean, that was before these last two fights for Tyron. And these last two fights, as you can, how you can say, were not very action-packed. They were not received well. So I think it'll be interesting to see what effect, if any, those last few performances have on these numbers. But again, this is a stronger card, and Darren Till is an intriguing character when it comes to the MMA space. So I could see this probably doing around the same 300,000 range.
Over under like 250, somewhere in that range, right? You could say
I would put the over under 275, and I would take the over probably.
All right. What do you think? Over or under?
Over, probably.
I will say under.
You think it does under 275?
I do, but again, it's a different time. It's a different time now.
True, but I guess I'm going off of UFC 227. Like I expected that to do 100,000, man. Like I thought that was gonna be so poor. So maybe this is going back to what we were talking about a couple weeks ago, where TJ Dillashaw is maybe a draw and we just don't realize it.
And Garbrandt as well.
Yeah, and Garbrandt. But I'd be shocked if it went under. But hey, we'll see.
Speaking of UFC pay-per-view main events from the MMA Fighting comments section, Nima, UFC 230 main event. UFC has 14 events left for 2018. Only 3 of them do not have an announced main event. Tough 28 finale could be headlined by its final or some other fight. Often the tough finales are the biggest of the shows. There's also 14 weeks left until UFC Milwaukee. However, UFC 230, one of the biggest shows on the calendar, is less than 2 months away and does not have a main event, whilst almost every other event before and after it has a main event. Do you think they have the main event sorted and they just don't want to announce it until after UFC 229 or some other strategic point in time? Or do you think it is still a work in progress pending of ongoing situations such as John Jones? In any case, given that champions at women's 125, 135, and 145 would not be an option for the event, and also 125, 145, 155, 170, 185 also would not be an option, and 115 and 135 not being big enough of a commercial draw for the event, literally outside of John Jones versus DC3, is there any other fight that could do better numbers than Nate versus Dustin? And now, Shaun, we've discussed this a lot, and I swear, I don't think a day goes by where I don't get a question about what is going to headline UFC 230. It is getting very close, and it is one of the biggest shows of the year on paper. It should be. It's at Madison Square Garden, and nary a main event to be found. What is going on, Shaun Al-Shatti? Where's the UFC 230 main event?
Excellent use of the word nary. I love that. I'm a wordsmith. I love that. Well, you know where I stand, man. I don't need to stand on my pulpit and tell you what I think, because you know that that main event is going to end up being and should end up being.
No, it's not.
Nate Diaz versus Dustin Poirier.
No, it's not.
Be the main event of that fight. It should be. It's ridiculous that it's not already. If you're the UFC, that's the one guy who you have not tried out as a potential as like an actual potential draw, who you have in your cupboard, in your back pocket. He is the one guy who has drawn numbers that you give him that chance to potentially draw numbers again. I've already mentioned this several other times, but I feel like the promotion for that fight has already been botched. It already feels smaller than it should. This should have been the Diaz show from the beginning. The last time you saw this guy, he was breaking records, even as the B side of something. It doesn't matter. He was still breaking records. Eddie Alvarez wasn't pulling those numbers with Conor. Jose Aldo wasn't pulling those numbers with Conor. But regardless, you have a little bit of insight on this, I believe, because you're on the Jon Jones case better than anybody. In my opinion, the only reason they're waiting for is Jon Jones. Am I wrong?
Where's your 209 tattoo located, actually? Where is that?
Hey, maybe we can make a bet one day, John Anik style, and then I'll get one.
You are beating that Nate Diaz main event drum for UFC 230. I appreciate your consistency, at least.
Hold on. I have yet to hear a single better option. The moment I hear a better option, I will bail off my ship and I'll go on that option. But I have yet to hear one better option.
Well, I mean, I think we know that they're trying to get Jon Jones cleared for UFC 230, right?
Yes.
So that would be a better option if they were to
Agreed.
pull DC Jones 3 out of their butts. That would be a better option, and that would be obviously a massive main event for the Garden.
100%.
But like I've said the last few weeks, from everything that I've heard, it doesn't seem like Jon Jones is going to be able to get cleared in time for that. I just going based off past history of USADA and their sanctions and their suspensions. It's very rare that someone gets a shorter suspension the second time, or an exact suspension the second time around as a second time offender. And for what he tested positive for, a steroid, that is a higher level as well. That's typically a 2-year suspension for first-time offenders, and he's a second-time offender, so he's actually facing 4 years. I've said this many times. I don't think he's going to get 4 years. I don't think he's going to get 4 years, but I could see him getting 2 years, 18 months, somewhere in that range, which of course would leave the UFC out to dry for the UFC 230 main event. So what do? I don't know. I still think of the champions. Don't say Nate Diaz. Don't say it. Look, I love the Diaz brothers. They're always phenomenally fascinating to cover. But I just don't think that will be the main event. I think that there are some other options that could be at play. I think that the one champion who would be available probably is Daniel Cormier at 205 if he's willing to make that cut down again. He said he is. Now, if he is, that fight is getting awfully close. So he's going to have to start dieting like yesterday for that. I don't know why you're laughing. I don't know why you're laughing so hard at me.
I'm not laughing. I'm just grinning because you're leading yourself inadvertently to the conclusion that you should be, which is my point.
Just let me finish.
I didn't speak. You brought attention to me giggling to myself.
Well, you had that shit-eating grin on your face, so I wanted to see what was going through that head of yours. So Cormier is a champion that would be available for November. If it's not Jon Jones, perhaps it could be someone else. And okay, fine, maybe that would not be as big of a fight as a Nate Diaz fight. Fine, maybe not. Because I don't know who would fight Cormier in that role, in that spot. Also, how about this? I was thinking about this today. This weekend is Woodley versus Till. Let's say now Woodley beats Till, does not get injured, or maybe Woodley doesn't even fight Till because Till can't make the scale. Either way, let's say something happens where Woodley is able to fight and is available for MSG. How about Tyron Woodley versus Colby Covington headlining UFC 230? That's not a bad fight.
Yeah, sure. It's not. But you're, again, everything everyone has said in regards to my point has always been with a bunch of conditions on top of it. If X happens, then maybe this can be a thing. If Y happens, then maybe this can be a thing. Sure, if Tyron Woodley, who is historically known for not being a risk taker, not wanting to go out on a limb unnecessarily, if he defeats Darren Till in a resounding fashion, takes no damage, and then really wants to turn back around and fight again in 8 weeks, does that sound like Tyron Woodley to you? Because it doesn't sound like Tyron Woodley to me. But if he wants to, and the Colby Covington fight is there, sure, I would acquiesce to you then that is a good main event for that card. But there are a lot of conditions you need to reach to get to that point.
Like you said though earlier, Tyron Woodley is a good businessman. It doesn't sound like he really regards Colby Covington's skills all that highly. So that could make him more interested in that fight on short notice. And also, Woodley took the Damian Maia fight on relatively short notice, like 4-week notice. And that's Damian Maia. And I'm sure Woodley's already been thinking about Colby Covington, probably with not very nice thoughts. But I think that's something that he could potentially do if he were to get by Till. Of course, that is conditional. Who knows what's going to happen this weekend? The other thing that I was thinking about is now we have some resolution with Nick Diaz's domestic violence case. Charges dismissed with prejudice. He is good to go. He can fight now whenever he so chooses to fight. Could there be a Nick Diaz main event at UFC 230? Could it be a GSP versus Nick Diaz 2? Maybe, or a GSP versus someone else. It looks like GSP is leaning out. Maybe we get a GSP 165-pound title fight as the main event of UFC 230. How about that, Shaun Al-Shatti?
You're just throwing darts at the board, man. This is ridiculous. You can't just accept that I'm right. You just can't accept that I'm right. Because
you're not right. You're not right. It's not going to be the main event.
Then I eagerly await all of these very particular set of circumstances that need to happen for what you're saying to come true. Because GSP isn't interested in a Nick Diaz fight. GSP is very obviously leaning himself out. If you saw a picture, I think you're talking about the same picture I am.
165, like I said, 165.
He looks like he's ready for 155, man. Like he's looked lean as hell. He is waiting for this Conor Khabib resolution. He could give a shit about the Diaz brothers right now. He's already done that. He's already been there. You know GSP as well as I do. I mean, he's going for legacy at this point. Beating Nick Diaz does nothing for him legacy-wise. If that's booked, hey, I love it. Again, Nick Diaz brothers, Marc. Like if this is a double Diaz show, I'm all aboard. I just don't even think Nick is very interested in even fighting right now.
He said in that statement last week that he's ready to come back.
Do you think Nick wrote that statement?
Well, it was written in an Instagram story, so it's very possible. Actually, no. I mean, if it was a Snapchat story, that would probably be more realistic for Nick.
Okay, so we're gonna revisit this next week because this could go on endlessly. But we'll revisit this next week, and if Tyron Woodley, let's say Tyron Woodley wins, but it's not in a way that he could turn around quickly, will you then acknowledge that I am right? Or will this have to stretch on more weeks? And then when you eventually do acknowledge that I am right, it will be it will be glorious. It will be delicious.
I don't think you're right. I just don't think you're right. I think you're wrong. I don't think that's the main event. I really don't. I don't think it's the main event. I get what you're saying. I think Nate Diaz is a draw, but like I've said, they need something big for MSG. And I think the reason why it's taking so long is because they are trying to come up with something big. And they have a way of figuring it out in the end, and they have a way of kind of maybe throwing money at the situation and seeing where it goes.
I see where you're going.
You're grinning again
because I see where you're going. You're leading.
Where I'm going. Where am I going? I don't even know where I'm going.
You don't, but I see where you're going. You're leading towards the inevitable Logan Paul versus Sage Northcutt fight. That's where you're leading.
That would be a better headliner than Nate Diaz versus Dustin Poirier. Boom. No, I'm just kidding. Obviously.
Oh my God.
It's way too soon for Logan Paul to get his ass whooped by Sage Northcutt.
Just as an aside,
oh my God, that would be glorious.
Just as an aside to because people us in the bubble, we're so at least I am. I'm so sick of this story already. But to just illustrate how anecdotally how much outside the bubble this is carried already. I had 3 different conversations with 3 different people in 3 entirely different places this past holiday weekend about is Logan Paul going to come to the UFC and how good would he do? It's already out there. I hate it. I hate it so much. I hope it doesn't happen. And I really just don't want this in my life, but it is out there and I dislike it immensely.
It's going to happen, isn't it? It's going to happen.
It feels like it's going to happen, man.
That's awful.
Let's move on.
All right. From the MMA Fighting comments section, the Empire 91, also a frequent viewer of the A side. UFC being lame with fans. Hey guys, it came out recently that the UFC had been reporting fans on Twitter for simply posting pictures. This is lame to say the least. Is there a way for fans to fight back? Is there anything more the media can do other than report on it and ask questions?
Yeah, I saw that.
Have you seen this?
I'm sorry?
Have you seen the situation where I guess
Yeah.
Alex Scafidi, who is a fan who also does some writing for some MMA websites, got, I guess, locked out of her account because she posted a photo of a fighter who wasn't actually in the UFC.
That's the part that gets me. She's not the fighter she posted. I wish I could remember her name. Is not even a UFC
Kayla
fighter.
Bracho.
There you go. She's not even a UFC fighter. She's not even signed by the UFC. She's still like an amateur. Like none of this makes any sense. This is, I mean, it's a silly story, man. It's a silly story. I don't know. The question is, what is there anything fans can do? I guess show them with your dollar signs, show them with your wallet. I don't know that that's actually a real answer though, because it's one person against a sea of people who are just going to buy this stuff regardless. There's nothing we can do. I mean, as media, the UFC, I mean, Ben Folks has been all over this story over on MMA Junkie, and the UFC is not responding to comments from him or requests for comment. I'm sorry, from him. This is kind of their MO historically. Like if you remember back in the days, there were a bunch of people who made brilliant fan-made trailers. Those would always get taken down. Who made brilliant like breakdowns of fights and stuff that would really like open the doors for new fans to come in and appreciate the sport and understand the nuances of it. Those always got shut down. It's so bizarre to me that this is still a thing because like, did all of those efforts really curb piracy at all? I would just venture to say no, not at all, not even whatsoever. If anything, it engenders bad will towards the UFC from loyal fans. But also, I mean, it's bizarre to me that like for a company that is so forward thinking in a way that like their embrace of new technology, like streaming services, they got on UFC Fight Pass way before streaming services were really like pretty prevalent. For a company who is so good at that regard to be so tone deaf otherwise when it comes to this certain aspect, like, because like part of this story was like she had like a picture of Nate Diaz choking out Conor in her Twitter header and like a couple of the other photos that she's posting, and they were saying that's property of the UFC. It's all silly, man. Like in some level, I can understand if it's a fight night of a pay-per-view and people are posting the video of the finish and you don't want that. Like that's understandable. At least that's defendable. But this one's just ridiculous on every possible level.
It's so short-sighted. I mean, wouldn't especially a photo. How does posting a photo of a UFC fight hurt the UFC's bottom line? How does it more exposure for the UFC hurt the UFC's bottom line? It isn't like she's making money off that photo. She's not making any money off that photo. She's not making money off the photo of Kayla Haracho, who's not even in the UFC. That is where I could see the UFC stepping in and saying, "Hey, you shouldn't be able to make money off of our product." That is understandable. But she's not making any money off of it. It's a photo. It's silly. It's just silly. I think that I'm of the belief that the more people tweeting about the UFC, the more people posting about the UFC on social media is a positive thing for the UFC, a positive thing for the sport. And I don't see the point in attacking someone who very innocently is, I mean, supporting the product in her own way. I just don't get it. I don't see where it just seems like, what is the end game here, right? What is the end game about attacking fans essentially for posting about the UFC? Would you rather fans just don't post about all right, we're not going to post about the UFC, we're going to completely ignore it, let's pretend it's like not happening, like they do on most Saturday nights when fight nights are going on? I don't get the point there. I think that the more content about the UFC that's out there on social media is a positive thing. It's still a niche sport.
Yeah,
we're not at the level of an NFL, of an NBA, of an MLB, and maybe it'll never be at that level. But the more people posting about it and tweeting about it, the better. There are accounts in pro wrestling that just tweet GIFs of pro wrestling events, and they tweet tons of GIFs from events that are behind paywalls, and those people who run those events actually like it. They like the fact that they're posting GIFs of these events, because guess what? If you see a cool GIF of something, like if you saw a cool GIF of a UFC knockout on Twitter, maybe you're not a huge UFC fan, you're going to be like, holy, I want to watch this. I want to see what, that was amazing. That is like, I mean, unparalleled athleticism. That is like something crazy to see. I'm going to tune in for the next one. If I can see stuff like that I just saw on that GIF, I want to tune in. I'm gonna. When's their next show? That's the kind of thing that happens. It's not negative posting these things about the UFC. So again, I just don't get it, and it just seems like incredibly short-sighted of them.
That all of that is true, and then also, I mean, the one part that gets me, the piece de resistance of this whole situation is if you see the email that this person posted from like the UFC intern or whoever the hell is required to do this. The last sentence of the email is something like, "I will keep monitoring this in the coming months to make sure you're in compliance," or something like that. It's just really twisting the knife in a really like I'm your dad type of way. It's super bizarre, man.
It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous.
Well, hey, I want to tee up this next question for you because this is your beat. Well, hey, I'm just saying. This is coming from Debbie123, and she asked about the curious case of Nicholas Robert Diaz. With the case of Nick Diaz reaching its conclusion, and we mentioned Nick already earlier, what are your thoughts on particularly the verdict and the grand jury not indicting, and just general thoughts you want to add? You've been all over this story. Can you kind of just explain it, I guess, for people who maybe don't understand it?
Yeah, so Nick Diaz was arrested in May in an alleged domestic violence incident, and he was being accused by someone who has claimed to be his on-again, off-again girlfriend of choking her, slamming her down on the floor, and also there was a scuffle outdoors with an outdoor pool where she allegedly landed on the corner of the pool and got pretty injured from landing on the corner of the pool. And that was a situation where she had said that Diaz actually purposely threw her on the corner of the pool, and then later she told police that actually it was just kind of he was going to throw her in the pool and she kind of slipped and fell on the corner of the pool. So it was those kinds of, I guess, inconsistencies in her story that made the grand jury not choose to indict Nick Diaz, and the DA in Clark County in Las Vegas was going to still pursue the charges. Actually, they added a third felony. He was actually facing 3 felonies and 1 misdemeanor, and 2 of those felonies were actually added after the fact. But last week, the prosecution decided not to pursue the charges, and the judge said that it will be dismissed without with prejudice, meaning it's permanent. It's not coming back. They can't bring the charges again. It's done. This case is closed. And one of the interesting things that kind of came out last week was that the judge said that made some kind of a joke about the grand jury in Clark County being able to indict a ham sandwich. So basically the judge was saying, like, the grand jury could indict just about anything or anyone for anything, but they could not find probable cause to indict Nick Diaz. So the judge actually kind of went off and said there are real crimes being committed out there that we need to focus on, not stuff like this where the grand jury, which can indict a ham sandwich, can't indict Nick Diaz. So it was actually a great outcome for Nick Diaz. And again, we don't know what happened. We have no clue what happened in that whole incident. And we hope that everything is, of course, good with both parties. Again, it's so hard to tell what the heck happened. But that was basically it. So he's cleared. I mean, he's not facing any more charges. It was a good outcome, I guess, from a PR perspective, because the judge was like outwardly, which is rare. The judge, because sometimes these cases come up and the prosecution doesn't pursue the charges because maybe the alleged victim doesn't cooperate, and that happens a lot in domestic violence cases. But it didn't seem like that was the case here. It seemed like they legitimately just didn't have enough to go on to pursue the charges.
Yeah.
So that's really, I mean, again, I can't speculate on what actually happened, and I can't say. I mean, we weren't there, and no one knows except for the 2 of them. But as far as how he comes off with this, it's definitely a positive for Diaz.
Well, that was tremendously well explained. Thank you for that. I guess my question to you then,
didn't feel that way.
No, it was because I wasn't up to date on all the facts too, so I appreciate that. My question to you then is, what do you feel like? Because we joke about him coming in for UFC 230, but I don't think that's actually realistic. Like, do you feel like in your mind, if you had to bet right now, is Nick Diaz going to fight in 2019? It's been so long at this point. Do you feel like he is even coming back?
I think Nick Diaz will fight again. I think he will. I think he'll fight possibly next year.
Yeah.
Maybe even this year. I think it's possible. Although if you look at his social media, looks like he's trying to fight at 205. He looks huge and not fat. Like he looks pretty like built. I mean, he obviously fought at 170 most of his career, and he fought that again fight against Anderson Silva at 185. But he's always been a tall dude. Now he's like filled out his frame. He's of course older, so I think he'll fight again. I don't know when. I don't know who the opponent will be. I don't know what makes sense. But in this era where the UFC needs stars and needs draws, Nick Diaz 1000% qualifies as that, and it sounds like, from the statement that he put out last week, that he's interested in getting back. And even some of the things that he was saying, like while the case was going on, and even before the case, if you remember, before he was arrested in May, he had told, I think, TMZ, or he had said, I'm trying, I want to come back. I think he may have even put it on social media. So I think he wants to come back, and you know what, he might need the money. I mean, there may be some financial reasons for that as well. That's true. I mean, lawsuits aren't cheap, man. You got to pay. I mean, and yeah, he has legal fees, of course, to pay for with this. He had good representation. He had Ross Goodman as his attorney, who is the son of the mayor of Las Vegas. Interestingly enough, that certainly doesn't hurt. But I agree. I think at something like his fight with Anderson, that was a big fight. But also, how long is he able to live off that money? I would assume he's gonna need money at some point soon here. And I hope he comes back, man. Like, I would just like to see him fight again. I think is he still in his mid-30s? He's still in his mid-30s. Yeah. I would like to see him come back only if it. So if you follow Nick Diaz on social media, you know that he spends a lot of time in Vegas, a lot of time in Vegas clubs, and I mean, look, more power to him if that's what he enjoys doing. But I feel like a Nick Diaz who is focused on training and fighting is maybe a more centered human being, if that makes any sense. A lot of fighters, I know he said he doesn't like to fight, but sometimes a training camp can kind of get things, get that discipline back. Centralize your life, centralize your life. That makes sense, right? But also, I mean, I think for forever long he has been out, that is ultimately like a benefit to him, right? If he does come back, because he has rested his body so thoroughly. Like, maybe he's out partying and maybe he hasn't rested it as well as he could have. But this is a guy who was in the UFC, who's not even in the UFC, but in MMA for like his entire life. So his fight years when he left were probably far advanced past where his actual age was. Now, having been out for so long, I feel like he's probably caught up, right? Like, he's probably very fresh. He could, if you throw him into the welterweight top 10 right now, like, I feel like he swims more than sinks, right? I have no idea. It's so hard to say. I don't know if he's gonna fight at 170 again. He looks big. He looks real big. He does. And that was not a fun cut for him toward the end as well. That's why I think he went up to fight Silva at 185. So maybe 185 is the future for him. But I think I don't think Nick Diaz comes back and just fights anybody. I don't think he just fights any old ranked guy. I think it has to make sense. It has to be a big fight. I could see them doing Anderson Silva again. I mean, I could see them doing like a big name fight, maybe a Robbie Lawler sometime down the line. That would of course be at 170 or 185. But I think it has to be a fight that makes sense. I don't want to see Nick Diaz go and just fight the number 11 guy in the world and just try to like work his way up to a title. He should only be in like significant fun fights, money fights, whatever you want to call them. Yeah, I agree with you. And hey, we've talked a lot about UFC 228, but let's look ahead a little bit. Last question on the MMA Fighting page, then we'll switch over to Twitter. This comes from M. Rossitron, who asks about UFC 229. If Khabib wins, he writes, "It seems odd to me the UFC isn't doing everything they can to hype up Khabib ahead of this fight. Do casual fans in the mainstream sport know who he is and how good he is? I'm in the MMA bubble and I know how good he is and how awesome this fight could be. But is this the case for the mainstream casual fans? Obviously, this will be a huge fight, but that is largely tied to McGregor's star power. If McGregor loses, will the casual fans just think, one, that he lost to a 40-year-old boxer and then lost to a relatively unknown wrestler? Both of these thoughts being laughable given the context," he writes. Curious to hear your thoughts on the current promotion tactics for this fight, of which I will add in, there really isn't a current promotion tactic for this fight. We haven't seen anything. And like you said earlier, this is 4 weeks away. What do you think, Marc? It's a good question, and I think it is important for the UFC to promote Khabib as this unstoppable, undefeated force, because in the event that he does beat McGregor, and I don't know if he will or he won't, but if he does, he will be a guy the UFC can push as a big star, and he should be pushed as a big star. And I think there is interest in Khabib. I think more than fans realize. I think that just from what we see internally, our metrics, I think he's actually one of the bigger names in the UFC right now who is not
agree with you.
One of the, he's not really considered one of the big draws. He's not on the level of maybe like a McGregor or a Rousey or a GSP or a Lesnar, but I don't think he's that far off. I think he could get to that point. As far as the promotion for this fight goes, I know they're trying. I know the UFC is trying to get something set up, but it hasn't been easy. It has not been easy.
They are trying very hard.
Yeah, it has not been easy for them to do it. I think they've wanted to do it already. They want to do it, I think, next week, but it's getting real tight right now. It could end up just happening maybe the week before the fight, maybe not at all. I don't know. I think that Dave Meltzer's reported that Conor McGregor has been the one who's kind of held things up, and I can see that it's a hard fight. Look, this is a really important fight for him, and stylistically, it's probably his most challenging fight outside of going to a different sport and boxing Floyd Mayweather. Maybe this is even harder in some ways. So I think that McGregor wants to have as much possible time as he can to train. I think he feels like he probably needs it, and I don't disagree. On the other hand, you got to promote the fight at some point, and maybe they will get something together to do that. But I feel like from what his camp has been saying, it seems like he's not coming to the U.S. until I guess a week before the fight. He's not gonna. Sometimes in the past he has kind of finished out his camps in Las Vegas. Does not seem like he's going to do that this time. It seems like he's going to spend most of that camp in Dublin, and then maybe the last week or so in Vegas, which would leave a very small window, if any window, for a press conference. I see it's weird because on one hand I feel like they don't need a ton of promotion for this fight because it's already been built up very well because of reality and the history between the two of them.
Sure.
On the other hand, I feel like getting them in the same room together before a fight week is integral to. Dana White was saying last week this could do 2 million buys. Well, I think that if they just kind of do a cold promotion, not that it's, you know what I mean? Like they just start promoting this fight on fight week and go right to the fight, I think it'll do great. But if they do something like a few weeks before to kind of get the hype going and building and the anticipation, I think maybe it could do 2 million buys.
Yeah. I mean, it is very, very clear at this point that the UFC is very frustrated trying to set up promotion because they, along with the rest of us, I think a lot of us ultimately, because I'm getting this question a lot, just on Twitter and generally, and I'm sure you are as well. It feels like we're all very antsy for it, and understandably so, man. Because this is the master of promotion; like he's the best promoter in this sport that we have, and it feels like now in the moment that there is a lost opportunity that is happening where we're not getting maybe what we thought we would for this fight that has been so heavily hyped among the bubble for about 2 or 3 years now. I always thought that this was going to get the world tour treatment, that they were going to be able to do something like that, at least a couple press conferences, maybe in the Maymax style where they did like a couple press conferences in a week. I figured something like that. We're not getting any of that, man. If they get one press conference before fight week, they'll be lucky at this point, it feels like.
Do you think it was too soon, Shaun, to do the fight at 229?
I was about to add, and I don't think so, because I think this fight, although that being said, everything I just said, I think this fight is still the right kind of recipe that McGregor and Diaz was, where once you get it going, and the Diaz fight, the lead up to that was about 10 days. It was all very, very quick. It was a whirlwind. And I think this could be the similar situation where I know the UFC is currently working on a lot of different promotional packages for it, just in terms of video packages and stuff like that. Once we get done with this coming week, 228, and those start coming out, and it's, these promo packages, and people start feeling the hype a little bit. Maybe you get a conference call or something, just something small. But once we get to that really 14-day, 10-day window, and maybe they can, at that point, Conor's in Vegas, and they can just do a press conference or just even get them in the same room. At the moment that hits, I feel like these two are so combustible that it will be a Diaz-McGregor-esque type of thing where it will erupt. It will be all over SportsCenter. It will be all over national talk radio. It will be everywhere. And within 10 days, I feel like it's going to be like this big flurry of promotion that we all get swept up in. And by the time it's over, you're just exhausted. You don't even understand what happened. I could really see a similar thing like UFC 196 for this.
What a difference a few years makes, right? Because McGregor would not come and do that press conference before UFC 200 back in 2016. Remember that?
Oh yeah, that's a good point.
Dana White yanked him from UFC 200. Oh, you're not going to come do the press conference? You're not fighting at UFC 200. And that just would not happen in the year of our Lord 2018. It just would not happen that way. If Conor doesn't want to do the press conference, that you better believe that fight's still going to happen, even if he does not say a word until September October 5th, October 4th. He's gonna do that fight. There's no way they're gonna pull that fight. There's no chance.
100%. Hey, you want to hop over to Twitter and bust out a few Twitter questions real quick?
Absolutely. From Dustin Love. It's a question about I guess it would just to kind of sum this up, would the UFC, would MMA fighters be in a better position to establish some kind of collective bargaining had Maymac not happened? And Dustin also adds in that McGregor got his license in California to exert pressure with the Ali Act. What are your thoughts on that?
So I guess I don't really understand the basis of the question. What would what impact Maymac has on collective bargaining? Maybe the assumption is that at that point Conor is not in need of money, or Conor is not so rich, I guess, that he would be then trying to spearhead something like this. But I don't feel like that would ever be true, because regardless, he's going to be very rich, much richer than everybody else, and he's made his money. He's not coming back to help anybody else. So I don't know, I guess, where the approach is on this. Maybe you have a better sense than me.
I don't see that having any effect. I mean, I don't think Maymac did anything good or bad for collective bargaining in the UFC. If McGregor spent all of last year kind of joining Leslie Smith and helping instead of fighting Mayweather, he was trying to organize fighters, then you could say that would have been a difference. But I don't doing Maymac or not doing Maymac had any effect on the collective bargaining. As far as the Ali Act goes, it's, first of all, I don't know if Conor McGregor getting his boxing license, and Nate Diaz has his boxing license too in a couple of states. I don't think that has done anything. Honestly, I don't think that has really done a whole lot. Let's be honest. The UFC only let McGregor fight Mayweather because they made a ridiculous amount of money off of it. If they didn't just let McGregor go and do that fight. They were a co-promoter. They made enough money to make last year the most lucrative year ever in UFC history. So it wasn't like they just did McGregor a favor and they felt pressured by the Ali Act. No, hardly, not at all. I don't think that there's been any effect at all with McGregor getting a boxing license. I don't think the Ali Act has come into play one time. In fact, it doesn't even come into play that much in boxing, because unless the Ali Act is not something where something happens and all of a sudden like a switch goes off and someone comes and says, "Oh, you can't do that." You need to take people to court. You have to like sue someone based on the Ali Act. You can't, it isn't like the Department of Justice is going to come along and say, "Oh, sorry, UFC, you can't do that." No, fighters would even if there were an Ali Act in MMA, fighters would have to sue a promoter, and that just does not happen commonly in the UFC. How many times have we seen fighters sue the UFC? Not too often. Of course, there's that ongoing lawsuit, the antitrust lawsuit still going on, but I digress. I don't think there's been any effect whatsoever with Maymac and fighters collective bargaining. I think it's kind of in the same spot it was back then, and I don't think anything has changed. So yeah. I'll move on. Anything more to add on that?
No, I think that was well said.
I'll move on to Darby Crash from Twitter. Win or lose, Rory MacDonald doesn't wear damage well. Isn't Bellator taking a big risk by having him face middleweight Mousasi before the welterweight Grand Prix?
Oh, this is a good question. I actually had the pleasure to talk to Rory maybe last week or the week before. I love talking to that guy, man. He is a true bad man in every sense of the word. It's interesting to me. It took a couple years, I guess, for this to get to this point, because the first few years of his Bellator run, maybe the first year and a half, were very slow. He only fought twice. And it was a lot of time in between, and it seemed like maybe it wasn't working out for him like he wanted. But a lot of that time was also spent recovering, right? Like he had to recover from all these crazy injuries he had, mostly from the Lawler fight, but also from, just the accumulation of damage for a guy who's been in this sport for a long time. But now, I mean, when he first signed, if you remember when he first signed with Bellator, all he talked about was the possibilities of like what he could do, the potential the freedom that he felt in Bellator to be able to explore weight classes, try different things, try new things. When I talked to him a few weeks ago, he was happier now than he has ever been in his entire life, because he has never fought in a tournament before. He has never fought at middleweight before. He has all these cryptocurrency sponsors that he wouldn't be able to have otherwise. Like he is doing things. He's living his best life in a true sense of the word, man. Like he is enjoying his time in Bellator so much, and I love it. I love that they're letting him do this. I love that he has 2 fights booked at once. That's crazy. I can't remember somebody ever doing that. So maybe, sure, Bellator may be taking a risk. Maybe the Mousasi fight ends up being like the Lawler fight and Rory has to be out for a year. But at that point, they already have, I don't know that it's that big of a risk, because at that point, they already have 2 very nice fill-ins that could step in and fight for that tournament. That's a 10-man tournament, not an 8-man tournament. So they have 2 replacements that could step in there if they need be. And then at that point, maybe Rory becomes like an end boss where the winner challenges for the title, something like that. So they have options in their back pocket. So for the most part, I just love it, man. I love everything Bellator is doing right now. They're getting creative with it. They're really trying out new things, different things, letting guys have freedom. I think it's amazing.
This is what Rory MacDonald wants. This is what he wants. It isn't like Bellator is taking a risk. I mean, MacDonald petitioned for this stuff, which is crazy, and that's just Rory, and that's why fans like him so much, because he's willing to try new things and kind of risk his body in a sense. I mean, literally risk his body to do things that have never been done before. And I think that's credit to him. And it could go wrong. I mean, he could end up getting injured in that Mousasi fight, but like you said, there are backup options. In some ways, you can make the case that it would almost be a better outcome for Bellator if MacDonald misses the welterweight Grand Prix and he just ends up fighting the winner of that, because I'm still not completely on board with him defending his title throughout the tournament. I think that's weird. But if that's what he wants to do and that's what happens, it could be very interesting. It's definitely different. It's definitely unique, which is always good. But if he doesn't make the tournament and he fights the winner, that's great too. There's nothing bad about that whatsoever. So I think that it's something. Look, I think I'm glad that that Bellator is not trying to be the UFC light, and I feel like a lot of promotions that have come along, they just try to kind of do what the UFC does exactly, with, of course, a lesser talent pool. That's just, there's no ignoring that. There's no way around that. The UFC has the most talented fighters in the world. Of course, there are a few here and there who are amazing. Michael Chandler's, the Rory MacDonald's, the Gegard Mousasi's, a few there. But for a large part, the UFC is tops in that regard. So if you just try to do what the UFC is doing with a lesser roster, it's not effective. Bellator is trying to do some different stuff, and to that, they should be commended. I like what they're trying to do. I don't agree with everything they're doing, and I think, like, again, the defending the welterweight title throughout the tournament is not what I would do, but I commend them for trying something different, and I will certainly be watching because it's a curiosity, and I think the MacDonald Mousasi fight could be phenomenal. I'm going to be going to San Jose in a few weeks for that, and I'm pretty excited for it.
Absolutely. I agree with you 100%. And hey, let's end with this one. I have to catch a flight pretty soon, so this will be our last question. Let's use this as a little bit table setter for this week, but also the weeks to come. And this question comes on Twitter from Gordy Soccer UK, who asks, which is the most stacked card, UFC 228 or 229? So in totality, Marc, what do you think? You've already said this card this weekend is one of your favorites of the year. Do you feel like this card is better in totality than what we're going to get with 229, or is that better?
I mean, it's hard to say because the main event of 229 will get the bulk of the attention, and it's just such a, I mean, it's the biggest fight in UFC history for all intents and purposes, right?
Yeah.
So it's hard to kind of see past that because that fight sells the entire event. You could put me and you on that card and it would still sell, 1.5, 1.6 million pay-per-views. So it doesn't really matter as much how great that fight card is below it, but it's a pretty damn good card. And I would put it up there in terms of depth with 228, especially now in the last few weeks, how it's come together with Tony Ferguson versus Anthony Pettis, with I mean, Michelle Waterson versus Felice Herrick, I think is a very interesting strawweight fight that kind of came out over the last few weeks. I'm a fan of OSP against Dominic Reyes, and of course Derek Lewis against Alexander Volkov. These are all good fights. Now, maybe there aren't as many great fights like on the Fight Pass prelims or maybe at the bottom of the card as there are on 228. Maybe 228 is just a shade deeper, but I have to give the nod to 229 just because when you have Khabib versus McGregor, that kind of trumps a lot of other stuff. So I would probably lean on that, but 228, don't sleep on it. I think, like I said, it's one of my favorite. It's one of the more interesting cards of the year for me because of how it plays out will kind of work toward how divisions play out in the future.
Yeah, I agree. I'm really excited. I'm looking forward to covering 228 this week in Dallas. It should be a really fun time. But to me, when you talked about most stacked, you talk purely about the pay-per-view at that point because you're getting the rest of it for free regardless. And if it just pay-per-view wise, the top 3 of this coming week is not even a comparison to 229, frankly, especially now that Tony Ferguson is on that card. The top 3 of 229 is tremendous with Conor and Khabib, Tony and Anthony Pettis, and then the Black Beast versus Volkov. Those fights are tremendous. And then, like you said, there Dominic Reyes, OSP, Michelle Waterson. Like, there's a lot of good stuff on there. I am excited for this week, but I am ridiculously excited for 229. I think that takes it for me. But regardless, we have the upcoming slate of UFC pay-per-views. Like we complain about a lot. There's always a lot to complain about in MMA, just anecdotally, because that's, I guess, how the sport works. But the upcoming slate of pay-per-views for this company are tremendous, man. Are absolutely tremendous. Between this one coming up, 229, 230 with Nate Diaz and everything we've talked about with that. And then, we don't know what 231 will be yet, but 232 will then be Cyborg versus Nunes. Like, there is a lot to like for the rest of this year if you're an MMA fan.
Oh, the bottom half of this year, the second half of this year is tremendous. The first half of this year wasn't the greatest 6 months in UFC history, but they're going to make up for it certainly with all these great cards coming up from now until December.
Yeah, very much so. Well, hey, that's about all the time we got here today. Let's wrap things up with the promo. Do you want to go first? Or you want me to go first?
I'll take it this time. Why not?
All right, go for it.
So I was talking with Tyron Woodley last week at a media lunch in Los Angeles. Well, I mean, we were all talking to him. It was a media lunch, and I brought up the possibility of a 175-pound division. Of course, there was talk about Darren Till and him possibly not making weight. And Tyron Woodley said something interesting. He said that he feels like he could almost be a 4-weight champion in the UFC. He said he could probably fight at 185, 175, 170, and 165 if that was how it shook out. Which, I mean, that's probably unrealistic. But when he said that he could fight at 165, that kind of got me worried. I know that people have been on the bandwagon about more weight classes, and I'm one of those people. But more weight classes is not the be-all, end-all with fixing weight cutting. There is a lot more to it than that. And what Tyron Woodley said last week was indicative of what people fear about more weight classes. And that is this. More weight classes mean that fighters will try to cut even more weight to get to the next weight class below, which would be Woodley cutting from he's fighting at 170 now, and he's going to try to fight at 165. So I will propose this. If the UFC does a 165-pound division or a 175 division or 195, whatever, let's keep it so that anyone in the weight class above is not allowed to move down. You're not allowed. You can't do it. For the most part, and there are some cases where this is not true generally, but for the most part, fighters right now are cutting as much as they can possibly cut. They are cutting as much as they can possibly cut. And in some cases, by a very small margin, if one thing goes wrong in their weight cut, they miss weight. So if anyone is fighting at 170 now, and there's a 165-pound division, let's not let any of those guys move down to 165. Let's keep them there. And anyone who wants to move up from 155, go for it. That would be great. Any like a James Vick, Nate Diaz, Kevin Lee, Tony Ferguson, all these guys are very big 155ers. So let them fight at 165, and then you have a true 165-pound weight class. You don't have 170 fighters who are already probably pretty big, probably already walking around in the 190, 200 range, cutting to 165. I don't want to see that. So my proposition is this, and of course, you can there are always exceptions, and we can look into maybe what CSAC is doing with getting a doctor to clear a lower weight class. But my proposition is this: if we're going to open new divisions, please don't let the fighters who are fighting in the division above right now move down unless they have a very, very good reason and tangible evidence to do so.
I like it. I like that a lot. Like a Valentina Shevchenko would be the type of exception you're talking about, right, where they have the clearance. But I love that. That's a great idea.
Even like a Donald Cerrone, you know, he's fighting at 170 now, but we know he can make 155, and it's not terrible. If Donald Cerrone is fighting at 170 and wants to move to 165, sure, but I don't want to see Tyron Woodley fight at 165. Even he said at the media lunch it would get a little ugly. I don't want to see it get ugly for Tyron Woodley. I mean, I don't want to see that.
Yeah. Well, hey, that was awesome. That was well said. So for mine, I guess I want to launch into this. I mean, this is going to be a little bit of a personal story, but we're all family here. Me, you, everyone out there watching, we're all a big family. We're all the big MMA fighting family. So I want to talk a little bit about family today and introduce somebody. Evie, come here, baby. Evie, hey.
Oh, hey. What do we got? What do we got here?
Come here, buddy.
What do we got?
This is a big dog.
Oh, my.
I don't know if you can see. Well, yeah, it looks like that. All right, so this right here.
You just have a big ball of fluff in your lap.
She is a big old ball of fluff. This is Evie, like the Pokemon, but spelled with a Y. She's the first dog I've ever had. And 6 years ago, on this day, this very day, September 4th, was the day I got her. I mean, at that point, I've talked about it a little before, but I'll let you go, buddy. You're not
not happy. Evie's not happy.
She's a big
doesn't want to be a prop for
she's a big girl to be holding for all that. But 6 years ago today, I mean, at that point, I was in a dark place in my life. I won't lie. I mean, my dad had just taken his own life, and I was kind of lost, to be honest. I didn't really know what to do, where to turn. Like, I was looking for something, anything to just like feel normal again. And then on that day in 2012, my girlfriend, who's now my fiance, was going out to a rescue shelter because there was like a Wheaten Terrier there that her club wanted to save. She comes from like a dog showing world. So they're all about Wheaten Terriers. So like, that's what I mean when I say that. And anyway, on that day, I really just didn't want to be alone, man. Like I was in my own thoughts. And so I tagged along. I had no interest in getting a dog. I didn't like dogs really. I just didn't want to be alone. And so we got there to the shelter at like 5:30 in the afternoon. And the shelter was closing at 6. So I was just waiting around for her. And somehow that little black ball of fluff in the corner of my eye just caught my eye, and it was bad, man. Like, she was clearly like emaciated. You could see all of her bones. She was covered in like her own feces. Like, there's no sign or paperwork on the cage door, like no indication of her name or breed or anything. Like, they had given up on her, and she had pretty clearly given up in general. And I remember, man, I'll never forget it. Like, I asked one of the shelter workers about her, and the answer was, I literally will never forget it. They told me repeatedly, "Oh, you don't want that dog. You don't want that dog." They said that she had aggression issues, that she had been found on the street eating cans and diapers. They didn't know how old she was or like what breed she was, anything about her. And in 15 minutes, when the shelter closed, they were going to put her down. And that's why they had pulled like all of her paperwork. She was like all alone and on her last few minutes. And I've said it a couple times, but I'll never forget it, man. At the time, like how she looked, how I felt inside, if that makes any sense at all. And so going to that shelter on a whim ended up being like one of the best things I've ever done, if not one of the single best. I asked to see her, and when they declined, I basically like demanded it. They reluctantly put us in a room together, and she walked right up to me and put her head in my lap and looked up in my eyes, and that was it, man. And she's ended up being a better friend that I could ever have imagined. Words can't express how helpful she was in that first year when I was like on long nights when I couldn't like escape my own head about what had happened to my family and like what I could have done to stop it. Aggression issues, my ass. She's the best dog I could ever ask for as first dog. She's a little weird and she's pretty food aggressive and food dominant, but who cares, man? I mean, so please, I guess all of this is a long way to say, support your local shelter, man. Like, there are a lot of Evies out there who could use your love. As for this one, we don't really know her birthday because, again, nobody knew anything about her. So today is sort of her impromptu birthday. So, hey, thank you, Evie. Happy birthday and happy 6th anniversary of the day we kind of just saved each other. You're my best friend, buddy. I really appreciate it. So that's all I got to say about that, I guess.
That was an amazing story. Happy birthday, Evie. I'm legit getting a little, not even being sarcastic. I'm getting a little emotional.
Yeah, man.
I got a little dusty in this sauna room for a minute.
I love this dog. I wish I knew how old she was. That's the only thing that gets me is like I feel like she's getting older. Like I never really have a good sense of it though. I don't know. Maybe if anyone's listening out there,
test or like any kind of like DNA or whatever.
No, like we've asked vets and they've never really like had a way to tell. So maybe if someone out there is listening to this and they know a way to like tell age, that would be pretty cool to just know. But for the most part, I don't know. That's about it. But hey, guys, yeah, hey, what can you do? But hey, that about wraps it up for us. Thank you guys so much again for joining us on a special Tuesday edition, early edition of the A-Side Live Chat podcast. It is always fun. We really appreciate all of you tuning in. Marc is making a nice little triangle right now. You can't see it.
Making the A-side sign.
Oh, is that what that is?
I just made it up.
I like that. All right, we're gonna have to do something with that. I'm pretty sure the MMA lab already has that trademarked. I don't know if we can do that.
It's really corny. Let's forget that. Let's cut that out of the replay.
We'll edit around that somehow. But hey, thank you guys so much for your wonderful questions. Next week we will be back at the normal time, Wednesday, 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific, talking all the good stuff from UFC 228. And in the meantime, keep it locked this entire week to MMA Fighting. Me and Chuck Mindenhall, along with Esther and Casey, are going to be out there giving you all the good stuff you guys have come to expect. And it should be a fun one. Like Marc said, this is a really underrated card. But in the meantime, for me, Shaun Al-Shatti.
Real quick, I just wanted to give a shout out to all the fans that I met in Chicago over the weekend at All In, the pro wrestling show. It was really cool meeting everyone, and we appreciate the support for the show and for the site. It's cool to know there is that crossover audience between wrestling and MMA.
You were just dying to fit in All In at some point.
You didn't ask me about All In. I'm gonna just talk to myself now in this room about All In.
You should have gotten someone to ask you a question on Twitter about it.
I don't do fakes. I don't put any plants in the comment section, Shaun. Do you do that?
I don't, but maybe we should start.
Think about it.
Well, hey, thanks again so much one more time, guys. This has been the A-Side Live Chat podcast. Replay is going to be up right away on YouTube. We will get something up on SoundCloud later in the day. And as we said, later this month, we should be joining iTunes, Stitcher, all that Spotify good stuff. In the meantime, enjoy the fights. My name is Shaun for Marc. This has been a lot of fun. We will see you next week.